welcome back to Beating a Dead Horse. As always, I am your host, Sean McKinda.
And I'm your host, Jackson Keller.
And this week, we're finally tackling something that I should have tackled a long fucking time ago. Probably before I watched Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, if we're being honest with ourselves, but we didn't. We're getting into some Quentin Tarantino, specifically the movie that neither of us have seen, which is important.
So we're doing Kill Bill, Volume 1 and 2, of course, because Quentin Tarantino considers it his fourth movie. It was made to be one movie. It got split into two movies because he didn't have his auteur license yet, and no one was going to watch a 4-hour movie. So Kill Bill is one movie. We're not distinguishing volumes here. That said, yes, Kill Bill is, although I have not seen Death Proof or Jackie Brown, Kill Bill was kind of the last of the major like canon Tarantino works that I hadn't seen. I feel like when it comes to Quentin Tarantino, if you asked like your average person, what movies did Tarantino direct, you would get answers. Probably Pulp Fiction would be the first one that comes to mind. This one would not be far behind. This is a pretty iconic movie, pretty well-known movie. And I had not seen it. It was the last of kind of the big Tarantino movies that I hadn't seen. Again, I still haven't seen Jackie Brown or Death Proof, both of which, well, particularly Jackie Brown, I've heard is very good and very unusual for a Tarantino movie, which I think also explains why he immediately followed it up with this, because this is madness. It's so funny, like even just talking about Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. I don't know if you could have picked a single Tarantino movie in his entire filmography that is farther in tone and in like substance from Once Upon a Time in Hollywood than this. And that was not intentional.
I entirely agree, and I mean that's just from the limited Tarantino movies I've seen. If you are just now joining us, this is my second ever Tarantino film I've watched. I just have not gotten around to seeing any of his stuff outside of Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, which was a weird movie to start with for all of the reasons we listed in that episode. If you haven't listened to that episode and you're a fan of Once Upon a Time, you're a fan of Tarantino, definitely recommended. Go check it out. Jackson says some very smart things, and I sit there and go, I don't know what we're talking about. I don't understand Quentin Tarantino. So this is kind of our hope to rectify that a little bit, though I don't know how much it really will, because do I get it a little bit more? Yeah, a bit, but also no, I don't.
So the thing about Tarantino, and this is, I mentioned last week that I might have some spicy Tarantino takes, and I don't know how spicy what I'm about to say is, but I think that there's a reason that even after watching this, like, you get it, but you don't, right? And I completely understand that reaction. I guess for what it's worth, before I launch into my, like, Tarantino scholar spiel, having finally seen this movie, I liked it a lot. I have never watched a Tarantino movie that I didn't enjoy, but for reasons that I'm about to explain, I would probably put this in the like lower half of like rankings of his films, and here's why. So for those of you who don't know, Tarantino rose to prominence as like, you know, the wave of like Gen X indie filmmakers who didn't come out of film school, were outside the Hollywood system, were just guys who were passionate about movies, particularly passionate about schlock. Very important to note here.
We'll be talking about that extensively in a minute here.
Yes. And they just decided, fuck it, we're going to go make movies, and, you know, ended up becoming part of the system, you know, basically as total outsiders. And, you know, that's great. But I think that's one thing that distinguishes Tarantino, and one thing that I really appreciate about him, and one reason that I've been so interested in following his career, and one reason that Once Upon a Time works so well with me, is that I think as a filmmaker, like, Tarantino never lost that, like, kind of indie edge. He never lost that affinity for schlock and, like, you know, wearing his influences on his sleeve and, like, all the stuff that people know him for. But I do think that, like, all of his movies post Bastards have a bit more weight to them, to the stuff that came before. Again, not including Jackie Brown. I've not seen that movie. I've heard that one is a lot, the most, like, out there in his filmography for being, like, slower paced. But for example, I really love Reservoir Dogs. I think that as far as like, movies, we described Doctor Strangelove as a perfect movie that like I wouldn't change anything about. I think I would also describe Reservoir Dogs as a perfect movie. I haven't seen it in forever, but like that was my feeling when I first watched it. But the thing about that movie is that like it is schlock of the highest caliber, masterfully directed, written, and paced, schlock, but it's still schlock. Like there are no higher ideas. Again, at least to my memory, like maybe it's been a long time. Maybe I'd go back and watch it and be like, oh my God, this was secretly Othello all along or whatever. But for the most part, Tarantino, especially in his early phase, is like, I like gangster movies. I like samurai movies. I like Westerns. I like all this crap that everyone considers, lowbrow. And I'm going to take those things that I love and make the coolest, best damn possible movies out of them. And I'm going to be able to get away with it because I'm just that good at the fundamentals of film. In a way, I see Tarantino. I feel like he's got a kinship with another figure who I'm a fan of, Hideo Kojima. I think the main difference between Hideo Kojima and Tarantino is that Tarantino can write and can write dialogue. To be fair to poor old Hideo, he's got to filter that shit through translation. But still, both are like directors who wear their love of schlock on their sleeve and seek to emulate the schlock that they love, while also to varying degrees, like trying to elevate it, whether that just be through the pure craft of filmmaking, as in Kill Bill, or in his Bastards Onward career with more like thematic depth and substance. And that is where my hot take comes in, potentially. I don't know, because Tarantino's most iconic movies tend to be his early ones: Pulp Fiction, Reservoir Dogs, Kill Bill. If you asked me, Jackson, what is your favorite movie? And I know it's a hot take to say that you love The Hateful Eight. A lot of people consider that his weakest movie, but I love The Hateful Eight. I would be tempted to say Django, maybe. Those movies, they still have everything that makes Kill Bill so delightful. They have, the style. They have, the seemingly irrelevant, dialogue and conversation that, swings back around to, informing the story. They have all that. They have all the hallmarks, but they're also about things. they're also exploring an issue. And now, granted, Django and Hateful Eight in particular, Bastards to a lesser extent, are really controversial because they are such edgy movies about real things. But they're very purposefully edgy. They're challenging movies in that people have been debating over the content of those movies and whether or not it succeeds in making a salient point through its methods. They've been debating them forever, and they probably will be continue debating that forever. And I find that really interesting and really thought-provoking, and it really shows how, you could take a guy who's still got that edgy indie spirit at his core that, you could see the birth of in his earlier films and take it in more, artistically pressing, challenging directions. And that's what I really love about his newer movies, and that's why I really love Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, and that feels like kind of the meditation on his career, which is also why it was weird for that to be Sean's first movie of Tarantino's. So yeah, all that's to say, I had a lot of fun with Kill Bill, and if like me you had somehow never seen it, I would recommend it, with one caveat that we'll mention. But as far as the Tarantino canon, definitely not one of my favorites, but a grand rollicking good time nonetheless.
I'm going to kind of jump in here with a little bit of my fresh, nubile eyes on Tarantino.
You really love that word, nubile. You use it a couple episodes now.
Oh, God, I'm so sorry. I don't, is the thing. I kind of hate that word, and I think that's why I use it. I think it's kind of a revolting word in a lot of ways.
Continue.
But yeah, so this is my second Tarantino film. I would honestly consider this almost my first Tarantino film because I don't really count Once Upon a Time in Hollywood as a Tarantino film, given that I did not have the context for it. At the time, it was more so just a movie without everything else factoring into it. So I would say that this is my first true Tarantino film, and As I'm about to describe it, I would like to preface everything I'm about to say with, I enjoyed this film. I enjoyed Kill Bill reasonably well. I don't know that it's something that I'm going to necessarily search out to watch again. I thought it was enjoyable, but I feel in general rather watch other things that it is riffing off of rather than this saga as a whole again. But what I'm about to say is all going to sound very bad for a couple of seconds, and I promise it's not. So to open with, Kill Bill is utter wank. Kill Bill is just Quentin Tarantino masturbating all over everything he absolutely loves, and that includes westerns, samurai movies, feet, Hong Kong movies, some good old gangster movies, all this good stuff in there. Like it is just things he loves, and I can only respect that. Like if you were to sit me down and say, Sean, make something, and like we're gonna give you an obscene amount of money to do so, I would be jazzed. I would absolutely do the exact same thing. I cannot blame this man for what he did, because you know what? He took that money, used the craft that he is clearly very good at, and made a movie that is fun, enjoyable to watch, and just a bizarre meshing of everything he absolutely loves in a way that is clearly just a love letter smattered in his baby batter. Like that is all it is. So apparently Quentin Tarantino put Sean in a very upsetting vocabulary state of mind.
I was gonna say, man, oh man, like my man, you got to close Pornhub when we're recording, brother.
But the other thing I want to talk about with this movie is the fact that it is bad, and it is so clearly intentionally crafted to be bad that it circles back around to being good just because of how much attention went into making it bad. So what I mean by that, because that is an insane thing to say.
I would also like to preface this before you explain it to be something more sensible. I just want to say that, like, I completely agree with everything Sean has said so far.
So what I mean by that, let me break this down into the three schools of bad movies. There are the unintentionally bad movies. I'm looking at your Birdemic. I'm looking at your The Rooms. I'm looking at your Troll 2s. There are your intentionally bad movies that are clearly aping a style and are just trying to make a B sci-fi original film, looking at like Sharknado and Giant Octopus and all that shit, where it's just people having a good time making a bad movie. And then there's Kill Bill, which is taking all of the things that make bad movies of like the 50s, 60s, and 70s. I'm talking like just super floaty fight scenes where nothing seems to really connect, but everything connects really hard. I'm talking like weird, stilted dialogue. I'm talking bad fight choreography. I'm talking basically everything that makes those movies the exploitation genre, the bootleg samurai movies, the bootleg kung fu movies, everything that made those movies so lovable to watch has been taken and expertly recrafted into Kill Bill. And the fact that the fight scenes are floaty, weirdly choreographed, the dialogue is stilted, is clearly intentional within these films, because you can feel that there is intent with every action. Like, you can tell that had he wanted to, these movies could have been utterly flawless and everything, but that would have made the movie worse because it would have highlighted all of the problems that are underlying everything else in the movie. And so what you end up with is this movie that is just a complete send-up of everything from those old, bad, straight to VHS movies that make it utterly wonderful. And so you have a bad movie that is so bad because it's great, which makes it bad, and so it's good.
I mean, this really is like Michelangelo, like stepping down from painting the Sistine Chapel to like paint like a fucking advertisement for a strip club. Like, just an absolute master of their craft, like slumming it, except that Tarantino loves this shit, and that's the key difference, I think.
Oh, and you can feel that love. Like, that is the important thing in this, is that every bad decision, and I say that meaning good decision within this movie. This is going to be a really hard thing to follow with everything I've been talking about, and I apologize for that. But every bad, good decision in this movie is crafted with such love and intention that it oozes just it oozes that baby batter. I'll tell you what.
Oh no.
So yeah, I mean that's my big takeaway from this movie is it's very much a movie that is incredibly well crafted to be a bad movie, which makes it a great movie. Again, I don't know how much I have an interest in like rewatching it. As Jackson said, it doesn't really say much of anything other than, hey, here's a fun, goofy movie. And at that point, I'm kind of like, I feel like I'd rather go watch a different fun, goofy movie. And like, I appreciate what you did here, Mr. Tarantino, but I kind of would think I would rather watch the source rather than the approximation therein.
For me, this feels like a stepping stone movie. Not to say that there aren't plenty of cool, worthwhile, interesting things going on. Like, you know what, Tarantino? I mean, wouldn't it be cool if the movie? Wouldn't it be cool if, people's heads popped off like champagne caps and like spewed blood everywhere? Wouldn't it be cool if it was suddenly anime for 10 minutes? Wouldn't it be cool if we did the silhouette fight scene thing? And the answer to that is overwhelmingly, for like 80% of the stuff of the movie, like, yes, Tarantino, it would be cool. Thank you. It was cool.
You know what I was thinking a lot about while I was watching this movie, and I think a movie that if you have an interest in watching Kill Bill, but don't necessarily know that you want to sit through the full 4 hours of it, Scott Pilgrim vs. the World has a lot of the similar energy. Where it's
I was thinking about Scott Pilgrim too. Yep.
Yeah. It's just a lot of, wouldn't it be cool if this happened? But also it like has something to say about self-growth and personal change and everything. Scott Pilgrim is a great
particularly the comics.
Movie.
Read the comics too. I love the comics.
Yeah,
stand them.
They're great. It's a great series. The movie is utterly wonderful. One of my all-time favorites. I watch it all the fucking time, and it is like pretty much Kill Bill, but half the length and with a little bit more to chew on.
A little bit more to chew on. You are trading the gore though, so if the gore is something that speaks to you, know that. But yeah, I mostly agree. I was thinking about Scott Pilgrim a lot. And I was thinking about Scott Pilgrim because I guess this leads to the other thing, in that like I don't think it's fair to say that there's nothing going on in Kill Bill, but part of the problem is that some of the stuff that is going on, it's not such a great look right now. And that's part of what I mean when I say that the movie is, I think, like a stepping stone movie, definitely for Tarantino's career. If more generally, like I know that in pop culture, like the character of the bride, like back in the early 2000s was held up as like kind of the gold standard of women action heroes. And I think that, if you're reading this movie through a feminist lens, there is stuff to enjoy about it, but plenty to criticize through that lens.
That's basically just Quentin Tarantino, the ideology.
Right. But I think that as far as like the stuff that there is more weight to, as far as like character development, theme, etc., is a little bit tainted by some real life context, which I just want to address. I think it's worth knowing this, so you can make an informed decision about like whether or not you want to engage with this movie. There is some Me Too related controversy with this movie. I don't remember how long ago this stuff came out. Harvey Weinstein is, of course, involved, as he was in most of Tarantino's movies.
That name is front and center very early on, and it makes you cringe when you see it. Yeah.
It's always pretty unreal to see. And then, Weinstein and Tarantino were close collaborators. So there's a lot of questions about like Tarantino's level of culpability in particular, to avoid the broader sort of discussions around that. In particular, there was a actual incident with Kill Bill that caused Uma Thurman to stop working with Tarantino, despite them being famous collaborators for this and Pulp Fiction, is that Tarantino had her shoot this scene in a car that she didn't really feel comfortable doing and would have preferred to do a stunt double, but he insisted that we got to get the shot perfect, so we're going to have you drive the car. resulted in an accident causing some pretty severe injury to Uma Thurman, and that's in addition to, the Harvey Weinstein shit, which of course also occurred around this time. So what is the point of me saying this? Is the point of me saying this Tarantino bad? Not necessarily. This particular situation is, there's a lot going on. Uma Thurman herself has said a lot. Tarantino has tried to make amends in a couple ways and own up to some things, whether or not that's all good for you. I encourage you to go do your own reading and go do your own research. I don't want to misrepresent anything that happened here, but yeah, I think that is all worth knowing when you're engaging with this movie as far as like making an informed decision and all that stuff. And I don't want to, again, misrepresent anything.
This is all just to say scandal noted on our part, but we're not really the podcast to talk about that type of stuff. We do try and mention it when it comes up. We have talked about a couple movies with some iffy directors and kind of been like, hey, just to let you know, that's a thing that happened there. But we're not equipped to really dive super deep into that stuff. And also, that's just not what we do here. So, scandal noted, and please make your own decisions when watching this movie, supporting directors, producers, all of that good stuff.
Do your research. As we said in our bonus episode on our Patreon about Death of the Author, no one can ultimately make the choice about whether to engage with art surrounded in scandal or potentially like abusive figures. No one can make that choice for you. You gotta go reach out to the truth and read that shit and, be an informed consumer of media. We support that here on the Horsecast. Yeah.
Please be smart. Don't just consume. Do your research, please.
However, what is relevant insofar as our podcast and our discussion is concerned is the text of the movie. And I do think that the real life scandals around this movie and around the people involved in this movie do affect how we read the movie. But in order to talk about that, we would have to talk about spoilers.
So we should probably get into spoilers then, huh?
I agree.
Before we do, if you enjoy the podcast, please leave us a review on iTunes. Follow us on Twitter at BADH_cast. If you really like the podcast, you can support us on patreon.com/BADHcast. Next week, we're going to be talking about Blue Velvet. So come back for that. That's going to be my second pick. We're going to be diving more into Lynch. We watched Eraserhead last year or 2 years ago. Man, time fucking sucks. So
we're getting old, Sean. We got that ancient gamer disease.
Time doesn't matter. It's all a lie. But we talked about Eraserhead last year, whatever. So I'm excited to get back into it again. Lynch is utterly fascinating, and I can say that having listened to a lot of audio from 25 Years Later site where they just talk about Twin Peaks a bunch. Spoilers.
Spoiler time.
Get into it. What's up with the text of the movie, and how do scandals impact it?
All right. Yeah, I mean, let's get the big shit out of the way, I guess. There are a few other things I want to say more generally speaking about Craft, but since we just led in with this and we don't want to end on the miserable stuff again, let's just go ahead and talk about it. So, I think that one thing that I love about Quentin Tarantino, I think one of the things that I'm attracted to his work, generally speaking, like a motif, a theme, an idea that's kind of present in almost all of his movies and in a lot of other creators that I really strongly attach to. Again, I think Hideo Kojima does this as well, is that there's a big focus on having these larger than life, completely unrealistic, completely insane, badass superheroes who are just the most capable, effective, violent, charismatic, charming people on the planet, and still exploring the humanity there and still trying to treat them as characters, which I think is one thing that this movie does well. Pretty notably, I don't think the distinction between Volume 1 and Volume 2 matters that much, but I think it is fair to say that there is somewhat of a tonal distinction in that Volume 1 has a lot more of just pure chaotic schlock energy, and that Volume 2 has a lot more of the character motivation, character development stuff. And this is one thing that I really like, again, especially about his later movies about, you have Django, like, ultra capable superhero, but he's an ultra capable superhero, like tearing down the horrors of slavery. And like, that's the thing that, gets your blood pumping and like all that shit. But with this movie, we're not explicitly focusing on tearing something down like in later movies like slavery or the institution of racism or the Manson family or Nazis or what have you. In general, the overall tone of this movie is that like this is a breakup movie through the lens of like a bunch of psychotic assassins. Like this is what happens when like Solid Snake goes through a breakup, I think, is the overall tone and intention of this movie.
I'm just so heartbroken for Otacon. They had such a beautiful relationship, and to just throw it away like this.
They even adopted a kid together. He's got all his health problems. He can't be on Otacon's insurance now. It's a big fucking mess, dude.
And this is an extended Metal Gear Solid joke that I'm sure most of our audience won't really understand, given we're talking about Tarantino. And that's what makes me really sad.
Look, all I'm saying is if you like Kill Bill, you should investigate Metal Gear. I'm just gonna throw that one on the table. That's mostly how it plays. And like, I think that's made really explicit in the final confrontation with Bill, which takes more of the form of a conversation with really light action. And way that we see Bill, and again, Tarantino loves, having his bad guys have those humanistic, like sympathetic qualities. And their conversation plays out as such, as like, this was a bad breakup. And that's kind of the language used. Like, yeah, I overreacted. Like, yeah, like I could have understood you better, like that sort of thing. But like, this is something that we got to do. We got to move on our separate ways. And like me being the bride has to like, go chase my bliss and raise my daughter and like live my life free from your influence.
And you, being David Carradine, needs to have your heart exploded. I'm sorry. It's just how it has to happen.
We're literally gonna break his heart so we can survive.
Metaphors, you understand?
Yeah.
Big brain stuff right here.
So
I didn't understand that until you said that.
Honestly, I hadn't put those pieces together either until I just said it. So I mean, that's the thing. That's what I think makes Tarantino so effective as a director, that he does put in like pretty subtle things like that are still like such an obvious riff on like ultra secret omae wa mo shinderu technique. Like, but regardless, that's all good. And I think that is one of the things that makes Tarantino super strong as a director. But part of the thing that I think kept me from getting into that drama so much, one, that it was mostly in that last scene, right?
I mean, almost entirely.
There was also that flashback of them at the church, like before everything goes wrong, and like, so that's a bit more of a character moment. But yeah,
it also, I mean, that flashback also kind of serves as both a reminder for what happened in the first movie, as well as kind of an introduction to the second movie. So I mean, like, it feels far more almost perfunctory, kind of like a catch-up moment than anything. It's definitely important for character beats and everything, but it also feels very kind of like you have to pay attention, but also if you saw the first one, you kind of get most of this stuff already.
There are definitely moments where you can tell things were retooled. Like, Tarantino obviously like loves to play with chronology, like that's in a lot of his movies. And I think a decent amount of that's on purpose here, but a lot of it is very clearly not.
Yeah.
And very clearly for the purpose of splitting it into two movies. So that's all fine and dandy, but I think that in a 2003 world, I think that extra little layer, that extra little, twist on the proceedings, like we're going to make a breakup movie that's also like a crazy, like samurai ninja Western cowboy, pastiche movie. I think that really works, but I think what makes that element, what makes it not gel as well is, say, something like the stuff that happens in Inglourious Bastard, is that for me, the specter of that real life stuff, of like Harvey Weinstein, of the sexual abuse scandals and the onset I don't know if misconduct is the right word. Maybe it is, but certainly negligence when it comes to like the accidents that occurred.
I feel like misconduct is probably the word to keep us out of legal trouble, even if it's not like the most. It doesn't necessarily have the impact you want it to have.
Sure. And so with all that, what really I think is supposed to be, at least like as presented, a relationship on somewhat equal footing like that now plays much more with that specter as like, oh, like Bill is 100% like a controlling abuser. And I think that's part of the text. Like he's like, you know, he's supposed to be controlling. I think that's part of it's played for absurdity of like, you shot me. Like we all make mistakes, but that's in a movie with Harvey Weinstein attached to it, that's not that funny.
Yeah, it has a little bit more of an issue than a funny element to it, because Harvey Weinstein is Harvey Weinstein and Harvey Weinstein is bad.
Yeah, and so like this is not me like necessarily condemning the concept of this movie, regardless of like its problematic elements. Like I said, I mean, if we wanted to do a full feminist analysis of Kill Bill, I think that would be a really rich and interesting thing, precisely because I think there's a lot to it that a lot of movies with their women characters don't get right, and there is a lot in the movie that it gets very wrong. And there's a whole bunch of stuff you could do there. So my purpose is not necessarily to kind of wag my finger at the movie or be with the benefit of hindsight say like this is a mistake. Like I said, this is why I like to think of it as like a stepping stone movie. I think that even if Tarantino's newer movies are controversial, they're controversial for reasons like in the text. They're controversial for reasons like, does portrayal of violence while condemning that violence like have the right impact? Like what does people using certain words does it matter like who the writer is coming from? Like those sort of conversations that are like actually about the text and not so much about like real life abuse, and that we can't look past those things is a bitter pill to swallow, and it definitely impacts my viewing of the movie.
I can definitely see why. I admittedly went into this not really knowing anything about any of the scandals involving all of this stuff. Outside of Harvey Weinstein, obviously, but I kept that fairly separate in my viewing, just because producers in my mind are very separate, and I did not realize how closely Tarantino and Weinstein had worked up to this point, and so I didn't really come away with that. I mostly came away from this movie admiring the schlocky craft work rather than the outside influences on it. Especially, I mean, that's just how I generally treat first viewings of movies, and usually where I mostly just watch to see what the movie is about and then later impose outside influences. So it's very interesting listening to Jackson talk about this stuff, just because this is stuff that I had not thought about leading up to this podcast and are very salient, important points to think about when watching Kill Bill.
And again, I think this is definitely, as far as the individual scandals on Kill Bill and like Tarantino's involvement with Harvey Weinstein and like his public statements on the matter and Uma Thurman's public statements on Tarantino, I think that's all worth looking into. It's pretty much the only thing I'm like 100% comfortable saying is Harvey Weinstein bad when it comes to this stuff, because otherwise you have to get stuff from like conflicting sources and start to think about information. My overall point is not necessarily boycott this movie, because when I, through my research at least, it seemed like a decent good faith effort had been made on Tarantino's part, and that Uma Thurman has resolved some of her issues with him, which makes it a little easier to swallow, especially now that Weinstein is facing some sort of legal consequences. Not, again, that lines up for you to decide, because I didn't know the extent of all that stuff either, and that's why I felt like I needed to do a little bit of reading once I was done with the movie in order to feel comfortable talking about it. So this is our serious business hour, everybody.
And again, I didn't have any of that context just because I don't know shit about Tarantino. I am, I'm going to plead ignorance. It's not a great thing to plead. You should always try and be smarter than ignorant. But in this case, I would not have even thought to look that up. I was mostly interested in the musical stuff when it came to this movie and like what was new for it and what was reused from other stuff, which I thought was interesting. But like in looking up that information, definitely did not come across any of the more problematic elements to the movie. Just people talking about the soundtrack and why it's great, which was what I was after.
Yeah, and I think that's fair for the most part. And again, I don't know exactly when the initial like Uma Thurman coming forward about the car accident. I can't remember exactly when that would have been. I want to say it was a couple years ago now. Like most of the articles I saw were kind of like backdated. I want to say to like 2018. So I mean that's just how the algorithm works. If you're looking at stuff about Kill Bill, I had remembered vaguely that Uma Thurman had come out and said something about Tarantino, and I didn't know it was about this movie in particular, and I wanted to know the exact details, so I went kind of looking for it just because I vaguely remember the headlines. So yeah, I mean, but I think in general, most of the conversation about this movie still is going to be about like all the references, just because that's mostly what people were documenting, and like before that was a breaking story, and also because like unlike a lot of these other stories, there seems to have been some effort to make amends, and Tarantino publicly taking Uma Thurman's side in a lot of ways. So I don't think it's necessarily prudent to just outright say like you should never watch Kill Bill, or you should never like go and look up the interesting references or feel bad about doing so. But again, I just wanted to bring all that up here just so we're playing with a full deck.
Fair shake. I mean, I don't really have anything else to say. As I said, this was mostly up to Jackson to fill in everything else going on here. I know, though, you did have some other stuff that you wanted to talk about. You want to dive into that now that we've spent half an hour discussing the hashtag problems?
Yes. Now that we've done that. So I think one of the things, because I was thinking about Kraft a lot, and like the fact that he shouldn't get away with this being the absolute madness that is this movie, and for having it to be such a popular, iconic movie. And I was thinking about Hideo Kojima a lot during this movie, man. All right. Because Tarantino gets away with these things in a way that Kojima kind of doesn't, even though a lot of it is just as stupid as the stuff that happens in Metal Gear. And I was thinking about why, and like what exactly is it about the craft of these action scenes, and what is it about like the character of the bride that like makes her such an iconic character. And despite being such like a blatant like pastiche, like caricature of all this other stuff. And one thing that I will say that I think really works, and one thing in general that I was thinking about that I feel like a lot of these over the top movies and shows and games need to make note of is that even though these characters are superheroes and like they even explicitly describe themselves as such, like there is not just that focus on the like humanity and the vulnerability of the characters insofar as like their personal lives and like they're presenting it as like a relationship breakup drama, but also just like the fact that the characters like get so fucked up and keep going is not a bug. That is a feature, and I think it's an important feature, and I think it's something that for a lot of these kind of over the top series that like people think work, I think it's really important. So one thing that I was also comparing it to is that superhero fights, like, you know, in terms of the like comic book style, one thing that especially newer superhero movies get criticized a lot for, I think, is these weightless fights. And particularly with like Man of Steel, where you had all of this bombastic devastation, but it was basically, when it came to the characters, like slamming two action figures together. And people, myself included, have compared what happens in a Man of Steel fight to a Dragon Ball Z fight. But one thing that had been pointed out to me, and after, again, watching Dragon Ball Z again, which I am wont to do, I, you know, confirmed to be true, was that Man of Steel really wasn't like a Dragon Ball Z fight. Because in a Dragon Ball Z fight, like those, it's not just the length. Like those are brutal slugfests of fights. Like characters get fucked up by the end of it. Like Goku could barely move even if he wins. Like not every strike, but like, you know, the big memorable moments, a lot of them are so memorable because like the characters, the heroes endure like such punishment. And there is almost like a masochism to watching this kind of action. But I think that it makes, even in something as over the top as Dragon Ball, I think the fact that, like, you know, when Goku breaks his leg and he still screams, he screams like a man, but keeps pushing on anyway. I think that that's what separates like the high tier schlock from the low tier schlock, I think. And I was thinking about this a lot, of course, with this movie, because we do get the glorious high highs of like the bride, like Assassin's Creed style, like cutting down 100 ninjas basically. But also, like, when she does, like, take damage in the fight, it's pretty hardcore. And, you know, in a lot of ways, again, you know, feminism problems, it's kind of weird and fetishistic in particular parts. But in other ways, I couldn't help but think of, like, you know, Punish Snake. Like, one of the reasons that, like, that character concept, like, resonates with people is this idea of, like, you know, the action hero that, you know, despite everything, despite all of this, like, mental and physical, like, punishment, that they're still able to do the job, and kind of the appeal of that. And I think that it's really interesting the way that this movie uses violence, because it switches between them so seamlessly. There's the fun violence of, like, you know, people's heads popping off like champagne caps and geysers of blood. But then there's also, like, when someone gets a really good hit in, particularly on the bride, and it's like, oh fuck, but like we're still moving despite everything, even though in real life, like, nobody could survive that. But as a visual shorthand for action, it works really, really well. And I think that, you know, people complain about CGI in films and making things feel fake. And while I think it's easy, like, CGI facilitates making things feel fake, I think when it comes to a lot of superhero movies, the problem is just that, like, you can have, like, the action figures run on autopilot and you can't tell if they're at, like, the beginning of the fight or the end of the fight. There is no up and down. There is no mojo. Like, every fight should be kind of a micro story with its own tensions and its own, like, twists and turns and areas where the hero is in more peril, even in an incredibly schlocky movie like this, which is why I think it works so well and people respond to it overall. And yeah, that's action. Kill Bill, Dragon Ball, Metal Gear. I am a very happy boy getting to talk about all this shit this week.
I mean, I could hang up this call right now, and you could just go off for the next 3 hours, and I don't think you would notice.
Honestly, I'm probably good. So there, we did it this week, guys. We got the sad stuff out of the way first, so we could just gush about a thing. That was your gushing. Anyway, that's it. You know, like Sean said, if you wanted me to completely pop off, I probably could. I'll spare you that, though. I feel like the broad strokes, you know, I've said my piece about its place in Tarantino's canon and all that shit earlier. So I'm good to wrap it up here if you are, my man.
I mean, honestly, all I would talk about is just like some of the influences, and that's been done to death. And my one little closing bit, I think, is mostly that the reason I think this movie works really well is that all the little microcosms work really well, pointing directly at the scene where she is underground being buried alive is incredibly claustrophobic and terrifying to watch. I absolutely hated it in the best possible way. It works really well as just kind of a microcosm for what makes this movie work as a whole, in that every scene feels very good and cohesive and closed off. Like each chapter works for that purpose as well. And so what you end up with is a very disjointed movie, but one where every piece stands on its own as a good piece of media. And so the overarching narrative isn't as important, because I think the overarching narrative is kind of, it's not weak, but it just doesn't really matter. All that matters is that you see the bride move from one scene to the next, killing whoever she needs to kill. And every element of it works in that regard. And so it ends up being a pretty all right movie.
It's all right. Like Tony the Tiger, but less swole.
I've been Sean McKinda. You can find me on Twitter, Sean_McKinda. I'm writing it 25 years later sometimes. Go check it out if you want.
I'm Jackson Keller, and speaking of Tony the Tiger, remember when Twitter turned Tony the Tiger into a gay furry icon?
I do, actually. I do very well. I don't know that Tony the Tiger is back on Twitter yet.
I love it so much. I've never laughed harder than when the Tony the Tiger account had a tweet that said something like, "Being outside lets me get my grade out," and someone said, "I'll let you get your grade out on me, Daddy." And then he closed the account. Anyways, I'm not quite as good as Tony the Tiger on Twitter. I mostly tweet about hogs and shit, but you can follow me on Twitter at Jackson J. Keller. And no, I won't tell you why I tweet about hogs so much.
The account's wild. If you want to follow us, you can do so at BADH0cast. That just basically when we tweet about new episodes and shit like that, if there's an update or anything like that. If you want to support the podcast, you can do so at patreon.com/BADHcast. $1 a month gets you access to the Discord where you can yell at us. You can yell at Jackson for just going hog wild, baby. At $5 a month, you get access to the Discord as well as a backlog of bonus episodes. We got a bunch of really great stuff on there. We got a great episodes coming up. Please enjoy them. At $10 a month gets you access to everything before, as well as the ability to request bonus episodes and a little something.
Thank you so much, Julia, Travis, Pat, Mom, Summer. Y'all are great. Y'all keep the lights on. Y'all are stallions, and you could be one too. Viewer, listener, give us money.
Patreon.com/BADHcast. All those things slows the highway for the use of our theme song. It is Suicide, alternate take off the album High Octane, Low Expectations. They're all bands. You go check them out however you can. The quarantine has everything shut down. Please support artists. Go stream their music. Go buy their music. That's even better. Whatever you got to do. Support your local artists, be them musicians, playwrights, actors, whatever. Fucking support those people. They need it now more than ever. Also, thanks to 25 years later site.com for the endorsement. There's a button of us in the corner, but you should also go check out that website. There's a bunch of really talented people doing a bunch of really talented stuff that you should absolutely read. Next week, as I said, we're going to be diving into Lynch again with Blue Velvet. So come back for that. Bye.
Don't you go into the ground. Don't you go into the grave.
Before we do, if you're... Did my voice crack there?
Yes, it did.
Before we do... Let me just slap this at the end.